I'm happy to introduce today Lawrence Reed. Lawrence is currently the president of the Foundation for Economic Education. That's headquartered in Irvington, New York. He's written extensively on a number of topics, and you can go to the FEE website, FEE website, so it's www.fee.org to learn more about all the different topics that Lawrence has written on. Prior to joining FEE, Lawrence was the president of the Mackinac Center for his first 2 decades. Mackinac is a state think tank for the state of Michigan, espousing and promoting free market principles and how liberty and free decisions can lead to the highest standards of living. He became president emeritus of the center, consuming his duties as the president of FEE last year. Lawrence holds a bachelor, a BA degree in economics from Grove City College, which he earned in 1975, a master's degree in history from Slippery Rock State University in 1978. He taught economics at Midland's Northwood University from 1977 to 1984, serving as the economics department chair from 1982 to 1984. He has been heavily involved in promoting free market ideas and the value of individual decision-making as appropriate macroeconomic policy foundations, at least over that, so from 1977 going back 32 years, both at the teaching at Northwood University and his teaching role, teaching in quotes, at the Mackinac Center. He's been involved in over writing 1,000 newspaper columns and articles, 200 radio commentaries, dozens of articles in magazines and journals in the U.S. and abroad, as well as the author of 5 books. What he's going to talk to us today is, you can either call it a pamphlet or a short book on the myths of the Great Depression. I present to you today Dr. Lawrence Reed.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, very much for this opportunity. I'm thrilled to be here in this beautiful facility, this wonderful town, on a gorgeous day. But I have to tell you something that our founder at the Foundation for Economic Education said about the weather. On particularly bad days, in the midst of a blizzard, people would be commenting about what a terrible day it was, and he would invariably say, "It's a great day." And people would want to know, well, haven't you looked out, or why would you say that? And he would use it as an opportunity to make a point and start a conversation by replying this way. He would say, "Every day is a great day." And that's my way of showing appreciation for the fact that at least when it comes to the weather, God and not the government is in charge. Are we getting a little feedback on the microphone? Is that, can you hear it? Is it a problem? Would it be better if I just used one and not both? Okay, you think it's all right. While I think of it, some of you have picked up a copy of this essay on the Great Depression. Some of you may not have yet had a chance to do so. But I want to call to your attention, we have copies out at the table. Everything I'll say to you today is in here and then some. So I hope you'll pick up a copy. Having said that, I hope you'll still stick around for the remainder of the talk. I think maybe I should turn off one of these. I hear an awful lot of feedback up here. How's that? Can you still hear me? Okay. That sounds a lot better. Okay. Well, today we're going to talk about the Great Depression, and lest you wonder why we would talk about something that has long since been relegated to history, let me remind you that this was, by any measure, a national trauma for the American people that still resonates to this day. And so many of our public policies today are rooted in ideas or policies that have their origin in the 1930s. That's not always been for the better, but understanding that period, I think, is critical to understanding what good policy is and what bad policy is. And so we're going to start first by talking about the Great Depression in its total magnitude, and then I'll talk about the Depression in its 4 separate phases. This was, by any measure, the deepest and the longest depression in American economic history. It wasn't by any means the first. We'd had quite a few in American history before, but all of the previous ones were over with in the space of a year or 2 or 3 or at most 3.5 years. This one that begins in 1929 lasts at least 12 years. And I say at least because there's a good case to be made that it really wasn't over until after the Second World War. So you can add another 16 years and make a good case that this was a 16-year trough. Consumer welfare, although unemployment fell during the war years, consumer welfare did not improve during those war years. We were busy diverting resources to the war effort. We weren't making cars and refrigerators and so forth. It really wasn't until after World War II that the economy undertook a sustained growth that benefited ordinary consumers. So even if you look at the shorter figure of 12 years, that makes this Great Depression at least three times longer than any previous depression in American history. In fact, there's one that occurred a few years before the big one that began in 1929 that the history books have almost forgotten. We had a very sharp downturn in 1921, one of the deepest downturns in American history, but it only lasted about 8 months. Unemployment soared, the stock market collapsed. It was clearly depression levels of economic growth or contraction. And yet we don't remember much about that one because it was over so quickly. And I have to tell you, this gives you a hint of maybe where I'm coming from in my general perspective on the role of government. That was the last depression that government responded to pretty much in what I would call the proper fashion. It slashed its burdens on the economy. It slashed the top income tax rate from something like 73 to 24%. It reduced government spending. This was a depression that hit us after several years of inflation of money and credit that helped accommodate the expenses for World War I. But in the retrenchment, the government did the right thing. It basically got off the backs of a sick economy, and it recovered very quickly. The Great Depression is a very different story, and I think it's best understood not as one big 12 or 16-year lump of something, but rather as a depression that has 4 distinct phases. And so I'll present it to you now in terms of 4 phases of the Great Depression. The first phase we call the monetary or the financial phase. This is the phase that explains why it happened in the first place, what made it start. And the subsequent phases will explain why it lingered and for a time even deepened before things turned around. The first phase has its roots in monetary policy. And that's, of course, something that's been conducted since 1913 by our central bank, the Federal Reserve, which badly miscalculated in the 1920s and 30s. It first engineered a very substantial expansion of money and credit that fueled the boom of the roaring 20s. An expansion that by some estimates was as much as 60 to 65% in the nation's money supply. Professor Murray Rothbard has written a great book called America's Great Depression, in which he traces this very substantial inflation of money and credit. It began in 1924, and it started to reverse in late 1928. But for about 4.5 years, money and credit expanded in this country by clearly a double-digit rate, maybe as much as 60 to 65%. This is the time of the roaring 20s. We had a land boom in Florida. Does that sound familiar? We had a soaring stock market. Much of the newly created money and credit found its way there. We had interest rates at rock bottom lows. The Fed drove interest rates to near 1%. A lot of folks look back at that period and say, well, where's the inflation? We don't see prices having risen very much in the 1920s. Well, you do if you look at the right things. If you look at land in Florida, if you look at the stock market. But prices probably, on balance, would have risen even more throughout the economy if we didn't have, at the same time, some rather positive things that were helping us. Namely, the drastic reduction in income tax rates engineered earlier in the decade under the Harding and then Coolidge administration.